The cold expanse of space stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of black peppered with distant stars that flickered like dying embers. The EFS Retribution moved silently through the void, its hull bearing the scars of past battles. It was a battleship with a legacy, one known in every major colony as the Iron Ghost for its uncanny ability to return from impossible odds. Today, however, there was no certainty of return. Commander Elias Grant sat in the captain's chair, eyes fixed on the main display. His jaw was tight, the faint stubble on his face catching the blue glow from the tactical readout. For a man known for his unshakable calm, there was a weight in his stare that even the most seasoned crew members could feel. Around him, the bridge buzzed with quiet urgency. Fingers flew over consoles, voices exchanged quick updates, and the low hum of the ship's core thrummed like a distant heartbeat. Unidentified contact, 14,000 clicks and closing fast, said Marin Cross, the ship's tactical officer. Her voice was sharp and controlled, but the subtle hitch on the last word didn't go unnoticed. She sat rigid at her station, her eyes darting over the data streams flowing across her monitor. No IFF tag. Not one of ours. Not one of theirs, either, muttered Harlow, the ship's weapons specialist. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed behind his head as he glanced lazily at his readout. Pirates maybe. Smugglers. Or just some lost rookie thinking he can dogfight with the big boys. His grin faded as he noticed the contact's trajectory. Or maybe not. Commander Grant didn't respond. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees as he stared at the glowing dot on the tactical display. It wasn't like the other ships they'd encountered. It moved too smoothly, no micro-adjustments or engine flares. Just a straight, steady line like a knife cutting through fabric. That wasn't human piloting. That wasn't human at all. Distance? Grant asked, his voice low but firm. 11,000 clicks and closing, Marin replied. Her fingers danced on the console, pulling up visual feeds from the long-range cameras. The image flickered for a moment, static clouding the frame, but then it cleared. On screen, silhouetted against the infinite black of space, was something no one had ever seen before. A ship. No, a shadow. A shape so dark it seemed to drink in the surrounding light. There were no lights, no markings, no wings, thrusters, or engines. Just a jagged, spear-like form cutting through the void. Magnify, Grant ordered. The image expanded, revealing the details, or rather, the lack of them. Its surface looked like smooth obsidian, polished and perfect, yet somehow wrong. It had no visible seams, no panels, and no hint of a crew inside. It was as if space itself had decided to take form and become solid. Tell me that's debris, Harlow muttered, but no one answered him. It's moving under its own power, sir, Marin said, her voice barely above a whisper. We're not alone out here. For several seconds, the bridge was silent except for the faint, rhythmic beeping of the proximity alarm. Every set of eyes was locked on the display. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the ship itself had held its breath. Then, the silence was shattered. Contact accelerating, Marin snapped. Her voice was urgent now, all sense of calm gone. 8,000 clicks and closing fast. It's headed straight for us. Battle stations. Grant barked, rising from his chair. His voice echoed through the comms, sending the entire crew into motion. The lights on the bridge dimmed, replaced by flashing red alert strobes. The low hum of the ship's core rose in pitch as shields powered up. Shields at full, Harlow reported, his hands moving rapidly across his control pad. Weapons hot, torpedo tubes loaded. Just say the word, Commander. Not yet, Grant replied, his eyes never leaving the oncoming threat. Marin, can we get a comms link to that ship? Broadcast on all frequencies. On it, she said, fingers tapping quickly. Channel open. You're live, sir. Unidentified vessel, this is Commander Elias Grant of the Earth Fleet Ship Retribution. Grant's voice was firm and unyielding, like a man addressing a soldier who'd overstepped his bounds. You are entering restricted space. Identify yourself or we will respond with force. There was no reply. Not over comms. Not on the display. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. The shadow ship continued its approach, silent as the grave. 5,000 clicks. Marin called out, her breathing more labored now. They're accelerating again. 4,000, 3,000. Brace for impact. Grant roared. The black ship suddenly twisted in space with unnatural precision, rotating end over end like a blade on a whetstone. It wasn't a maneuver any human ship could have pulled off. No inertia, no thruster burns, just a perfect, effortless spin. And then it did something far worse. It stopped. Dead stop. No deceleration, no gradual easing into position. It simply stopped like it had hit an invisible wall. The silence returned. Sir, it's just sitting there, Marin said, disbelief dripping from every word. No movement. No weapons signatures. It's just watching us. Watching us, huh? Harlow said with a laugh, though there was no humor in it. That's worse. Hold fire, Grant said, his eyes narrowing at the display. It's waiting for something. What do we do, Commander? Marin asked quietly. We wait too, Grant said, eyes never leaving the screen. We wait and we watch. For several minutes, nothing happened. The two ships drifted in the vast Black Sea, staring at each other like old enemies who'd met again after years of separation. The crew of the Retribution waited, nerves stretched to the breaking point. Every second felt like an hour. Then, without warning, a transmission came through. A soft static buzz, followed by a series of low, rhythmic clicks. It wasn't language, not one anyone knew, but it was unmistakably deliberate. Sir, we're receiving something, Marin said, eyes darting to the comms display. It's not encrypted. Just a straight signal. Patch it through, Grant ordered. The bridge filled with the soft, hollow sound of clicking. It repeated itself, again and again, like an insect tapping glass. Everyone stared at the speakers, waiting for something more. Then it stopped. Dead silence. What was that supposed to be? Harlow asked, tapping his console. Is it code? A message? The answer came before anyone could respond. The black ship moved. Slowly, deliberately, it drifted forward, closing the distance between it and the Retribution by 100 meters. The proximity alarms blared, and everyone on the bridge jolted to action. Sir, it's closing in on us, Marin said, her fingers flying across the controls. Shields are holding, but if it gets any closer, it could board us. Let it, Grant said. His voice was cold as the space outside. The crew looked at him, their eyes filled with uncertainty. But none of them questioned him. Not here. Not now. Not after everything they'd seen. Another burst of static filled the bridge, and this time, it wasn't clicks. It was a voice. You are seen. Every light on the ship flickered. The hum of the core changed pitch, vibrating deep and sharp like a growl. The words echoed, layered with distortion, as if spoken by 1,000 voices in unison. You are seen. Commander! Marin's voice was barely a whisper. Grant clenched his jaw. His eyes didn't leave the black ship. I know, he muttered. I see you too. Dogfight it is. Harlow's grin was wide and wild as his hands flew over the weapons console. Permission to send Em a message of our own, sir. Permission granted, Grant said with a grim smile. Light it up. The Retribution's cannons flared to life. The silence of space shattered as the Retribution's cannons roared to life. Streams of white-hot plasma streaked across the void, lighting up the darkness like bolts of lightning in a storm. Each shot was a thunderclap of fury, and each impact bloomed into brief flashes of blue sparks as energy collided with energy. But the black ship didn't run. It didn't dodge. It didn't fire back. It just moved. Like a shadow shifting under a flickering light, the ship's form rippled, distorting the space around it. The plasma bolts grazed its hull but didn't explode. They vanished on contact, snuffed out like flames underwater. The bridge of the Retribution went dead quiet as the crew watched in stunned disbelief. No effect, Marin reported, her voice strained with disbelief. Direct hits, zero damage. It's absorbing the energy, Commander. Her fingers flew across the console as she pulled up the data. It's not reflecting it. It's consuming it. Impossible, Harlow muttered, his grin long gone. His hands hovered over the weapon's console, hesitation creeping into his movements. Nothing eats plasma. Not like that. Commander Grant's eyes were locked on the tactical display, his mind moving faster than the crew could see. Not nothing, he muttered. Something. He turned to Marin. Give me a mass analysis on that ship. Density, structure, heat signature, everything. On it, sir, Marin said, swiping through streams of data. Her brow furrowed as she analyzed the feed. No heat signature. Hull density is off the charts. Mass readings are fluctuating? No, that can't be right. She double-checked. It's like the ship is shifting its internal structure, Commander. It's adapting. Adapting to what? Harlow asked, eyes darting between the screens. It's a ship, not a living thing. Maybe it's both, Marin replied grimly. Grant didn't like where that thought was headed. He'd seen plenty of strange things in his time as captain, but a ship that fed on energy and adapted its mass on the fly? That was something else. Something beyond human engineering. All right, Grant said, his voice hard as steel. If energy doesn't work, we switch tactics. Harlow, load a kinetic torpedo. Kinetic? Harlow's eyebrows raised. That's old school, Commander. Sometimes old school works, Grant replied. His eyes stayed on the black ship. It hovered just a few hundred meters from the Retribution now, perfectly still, as if it were watching them make their move. Loading kinetic, Harlow said, his grin returning. His fingers moved like a pianist playing a symphony of destruction. The torpedo bay echoed with the dull thud of the arming sequence. Torpedo loaded, target locked. On your word, Commander. Grant stepped forward, his eyes narrow with resolve. Fire. The torpedo shot out like a thunderbolt, its trail a streak of white light against the abyss. It crossed the distance in seconds, too fast for any pilot to evade. For a brief moment, it seemed like victory. A flash of fire. A burst of kinetic force. Metal on metal. But then, something happened that no one expected. The black ship moved. Not like a ship dodging an attack. No thruster burn, no banking turn. It simply shifted. Like it blinked from one place to another, its jagged form sliding sideways in an instant. The torpedo passed through empty space and detonated harmlessly in the distance. How did it do that? Marin stammered, her face pale. It didn't move, it teleported. It phased. Quantum slip, Grant muttered under his breath. His eyes narrowed as his mind put the pieces together. It's not flying. It's skipping. Skipping. Harlow barked a short laugh. You telling me it's jumping between points in space? Exactly, Grant said, his gaze locked on the display. And if it can do that, it doesn't need weapons. It can be anywhere, anytime. The crew went silent. That realization hit them harder than any torpedo could. Commander, Marin said, her voice low and tense. We have incoming. From where? Grant demanded, his eyes scanning the tactical display. Marin's face went pale. Everywhere. The black ship blurred. Not just one ship, but 2. Then 4. Then 8. The tactical display lit up with contacts, each one identical to the original. No engine trails, no thrust vectors, no evidence of movement. They were just there. 8 black daggers hanging in the void, each one locking in on the Retribution like wolves circling prey. Targets multiplying. Harlow shouted, his hands moving fast on the weapon's console. 8, no, 12. It's cloning itself, Commander. Not clones, Grant growled. Reflections. His eyes darted over the display. They are projections. It's trying to make us panic. Well, it's working. Harlow snapped. Which one do I shoot, Commander? None of them, Grant said, his voice calm but firm. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Harlow's shoulder. That's what it wants. It wants us to waste our shots, split our focus. He turned toward Marin. I want a spectral scan on those signals. Find the one that's real. Marin's fingers flew over the keys. Her eyes darted left and right as she analyzed the readings. I'm on it, sir, but it's bouncing the signal between them. It's like chasing a ghost. Then stop chasing it, Grant said. Look for what isn't changing. Even a ghost leaves footprints if you know where to look. Marin's eyes widened. She nodded, her fingers moving with new purpose. Looking for static frequencies now, filtering noise, got it. Her voice lifted with excitement. There's a lag. One of them has a delay in its reflection. It's subtle, but it's there. Mark it, Grant said, his eyes cold and sharp as a blade. Target marked, Marin replied. A red circle appeared on the display, highlighting one of the 12 ships. Got you now, Harlow growled, his grin back with full force. Permission to engage, Commander. Grant hesitated for half a second, his eyes on the black ship. It had played them for fools, tricked them with illusions. But now, it was his turn. Fire. The Retribution's cannons roared like thunder, sending a wall of plasma directly at the marked ship. No warning. No delay. This time, there was no dodging, no blinking away. The bolts slammed into the black ship's hull with full force. Sparks and flames erupted from its sleek form, and a shockwave rippled through space. The shadow flickered, trembled, and then all the false copies vanished in an instant. Direct hit. Marin called, her voice triumphant. Hull breach confirmed. It's leaking mass. Yeah, bleed for us, Harlow growled, his eyes wild with adrenaline. You're not so invincible now, are you? Don't celebrate yet, Grant said, his eyes still on the display. It's still here. As if responding to his words, the black ship moved again. But this time, it didn't blink away. It charged. Fast. Faster than anything they'd ever seen. A straight line, right for the bridge. Brace. Grant roared. The impact was like a hammer from the gods. The Retribution shook with violent force, crew members thrown from their seats as alarms blared across the ship. Sparks flew from the consoles. Oxygen vented from a breach on Deck 3. Lights flickered as the ship's systems struggled to compensate. Damage report. Grant shouted, gripping his chair to stay upright. Hull breach on Deck 3, Marin gasped, wiping blood from her brow. Emergency bulkheads sealing. No casualties. Shields are down to 37%. Harlow called, his fingers moving in a frenzy. We can't take another hit like that, Commander. Grant straightened, eyes locked on the black ship outside. It hovered, still and silent, right in front of the Retribution. Then we don't give it the chance, Grant said, his voice like a razor's edge. Prepare for close-quarters combat. The silence inside the Retribution was deafening. The only sounds were the faint hum of the ship's failing power conduits and the distant hiss of airlocks sealing Deck 3. Crew members glanced at each other with eyes wide from shock and adrenaline. The black ship hadn't just fought them, it had declared dominance. Commander Grant stood at the center of the bridge, his gaze fixed on the twisted, jagged form of the black ship just outside the main viewport. It hung there like a predator watching its prey, unmoving but undeniably aware. The crew knew it too. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a test. Status on weapons. Grant's voice was sharp, cutting through the tense atmosphere like a blade. Plasma cannons still functional, Marin replied, wiping sweat from her brow. Her fingers danced over the controls. But we're down to 14% energy reserves. Shields are recharging but holding at 42%. She glanced at him, her eyes betraying her worry. If it rams us again, Commander, we won't hold. Harlow clenched his fists, his eyes blazing with frustration. Then we don't let it ram us, sir. I say we hit it with everything we've got. Full salvo, empty the magazine, kinetic torpedoes, plasma cannons, all of it. And when we're out of ammo? Grant asked, his gaze still on the black ship. Harlow hesitated, his face scrunching into a scowl. We go down swinging, sir. Swinging is easy, Harlow, Grant muttered, his eyes narrowing. Winning is harder. He turned to Marin. Any updates on its structure? Weak points? Anything? Marin hesitated, pulling up more sensor data. No heat signature. No biosigns. No central core we can target. If it's a machine, it's not running on anything we understand. And if it's alive, she trailed off, not wanting to finish that thought. Then we change the way we think, Grant muttered. His eyes narrowed as he studied the ship. It's fast, it's adaptable, and it's patient. It's waiting for us to make a mistake. Then let's not give it that chance, Harlow growled, his hands still hovering over the weapons console. Give me the green light, Commander, and I'll give that thing something to think about. But Grant didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the black ship, watching it, analyzing it. He noticed something subtle, something no one else had seen. The way it moved earlier. The way it blinked instead of dodging. The way it created reflections of itself. It didn't behave like a machine. It behaved like something that didn't belong here. Quantum phasing, Grant said softly. His voice was calm, but his mind was racing. It's not jumping. It's peeking. Peeking? Marin asked, her brow furrowing. It's not jumping through space, Grant explained, his eyes now filled with clarity. It's peering into another dimension. It's not running from us. It's stepping into a space we can't see. The room fell quiet as everyone processed what that meant. It wasn't teleportation. It wasn't warping. It was something far worse. So, what do we do? Marin asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Grant's gaze turned cold. We pull it back. Harlow raised an eyebrow. Pull it back? With what? A rope? Close enough, Grant said, walking toward the central console. His fingers moved rapidly over the control screen, and a schematic of the Retribution appeared. His eyes darted from one subsystem to another. Marin, I want every ounce of power diverted to the Gravewell generator. Sir. Marin blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. The Gravewell is for anchoring debris fields and mining ops. It wasn't designed for. Do it, Grant snapped, his eyes blazing with determination. If that thing's slipping into another dimension, we'll anchor it in this one. We'll force it to stay right here with us. The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances, but no one questioned him further. Marin's fingers flew over the controls. Rerouting power now. Shields will drop to 15%, Commander. Do it, Grant said without hesitation. Harlow, ready the kinetic torpedoes. Full spread. Harlow grinned, his fingers moving faster than ever. Now you're speaking my language. Just be ready to fire on my mark, Grant said, his eyes still locked on the black ship. It hadn't moved since the collision. Not an inch. It was waiting, watching, calculating. Gravewell online, Commander, Marin called, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of her console. Energy reserves at 9% and dropping. If we drain it all, we'll be dead in the water. Better to be dead in the water than dead in space, Grant said. Activate it. There was a deep, guttural hum that filled the bridge. It started as a low vibration in their bones, but soon it grew into a thrumming pulse they could feel in their chests. Lights flickered as power drained from the ship's systems, dimming everything except the glowing outline of the Gravewell controls. Outside, the black ship twitched. Its jagged edges rippled, like ink bleeding into water. It moved, just barely, but it was enough for Grant to know it was working. It's reacting, Marin shouted. The ship is distorting. We've got it, Commander. Not yet, Grant said. His eyes didn't blink. Pull it in. Marin increased the field's intensity, her fingers moving so fast it was a blur. The hum turned into a deafening thrum, and the ship shuddered as the power surged to maximum. The black ship jolted violently, its sleek form bending and twisting like it was being yanked by an invisible chain. It fought back, flickering in and out of visibility as it tried to phase away, but every time it flickered, the Gravewell pulled it right back. It's locked, Marin shouted. We've anchored it in our plane. Now, Harlow. Grant's voice was sharp as a blade. Full spread. Fire. Firing. Harlow barked, his grin wild and unhinged. The bridge echoed with the rapid thumps of torpedo launches. 5 kinetic torpedoes shot out in a staggered arc, each one glowing with fiery trails behind them. The black ship twitched, its shape twisting unnaturally as it tried to phase away. But this time, it had nowhere to go. The Gravewell held it firmly in place. The torpedoes hit, one after another. Boom, 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 boom. The shockwaves rippled through the void, each one lighting up the blackness with fiery explosions. The black ship shuddered, cracks spiderwebbing across its surface. Its jagged edges crumbled, shards of obsidian-like material scattering into space. For the first time, the Predator was bleeding. Direct hits, Marin said breathlessly. Significant structural collapse. It's breaking apart. Is it dead? Harlow asked, his hands still hovering over the weapon's controls, ready to fire again. But Grant didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the black ship. Even as it crumbled, its shadow flickered. Not like it was phasing. Like it was, laughing. "Commander?" Marin asked, her voice full of fear. "What's happening?" "Gravewell's pulling something else," Grant muttered, his voice hollow. "It's not just the ship." "What do you mean something else?" Hollow's grin was gone. His eyes darted between the ship and the console. And then, they saw it. From within the black ship's crumbling shell, something moved. Not metal. Not machine. It moved like liquid shadow, a mass of writhing tendrils. No lights. No edges. No form. Just pure darkness, bleeding out into space like ink in water. "What is that?" Marin whispered, her voice barely audible. Grant's heart sank as he watched the darkness spread, curling like smoke in the vacuum. He knew, without a doubt, that they had made a mistake. "It's not a ship," he said quietly. "It's a cage." The last shard of the black ship crumbled away. The darkness was free. The darkness drifted through the vacuum like smoke under water, moving without haste but with undeniable purpose. It didn't rush, nor did it falter. It knew exactly where it was going. "Commander, it's coming toward us." Marin's voice was trembling, each word more brittle than the last. Her eyes darted across the data screens, but the sensors registered nothing. No mass. No radiation. No known energy signatures. It was as if space itself had simply decided to move. "Shut it down," Grant ordered, his voice sharp and firm. "Shut down the Gravewell now." "I'm trying, sir." Marin's fingers flew over the console, tapping command after command. "It's not responding. The system's locked up. It's like something's jamming the controls." Her breathing grew heavier as the console flickered with static. "Manual override," Grant barked. "Cut the power from the main conduit if you have to. Kill it now." "On it." Marin spun out of her chair, racing toward the emergency power junction. Her hands worked quickly, unscrewing the panel with practiced efficiency. Harlow watched her with a mix of concern and impatience, his hands twitching as if ready to punch something that wouldn't punch back. The darkness was closer now. It didn't move as much as it shifted forward, vanishing from one point and reappearing at another. It didn't care for the laws of space. It didn't need to. "Distance to contact?" Grant asked, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. 30 meters, Marin gasped as she yanked a cable free, sparks crackling in the air. 25, 20. "It's accelerating, Commander." "Power down now," Grant bellowed. Marin pulled the last cable free, and for a brief, blessed moment, everything went dark. The hum of the Gravewell cut off, and the bridge was bathed in emergency red lighting. For a second, it felt like they'd won. But then, the air grew cold. Not figuratively. Literally. The temperature dropped so fast that frost formed on the metal railings of the bridge. The crew's breaths turned to mist. The hum of the ship's systems was replaced by an unnatural silence, the kind of silence that wasn't just quiet but empty. "It's still here," Harlow muttered, taking a slow step back. His eyes darted toward the viewport, where the darkness now hovered directly outside the glass. It wasn't smoke anymore. It had shape. Tendrils like roots or veins snaked across the surface of the viewport, pressing, tapping, like fingers drumming against a table. Grant's heart thudded in his chest. "It's testing us," he said under his breath, his eyes locked on the writhing shapes. "Seeing how strong the glass is." Then, all at once, the tapping stopped. The tendrils retracted slowly, almost as if it were reconsidering. The darkness pulled away, floating backward into open space. Did it give up?" Marin asked, wiping sweat from her forehead. Her breath was fogging the air, and her eyes were wild with hope. "No," Grant muttered. His eyes never left the shape. "It realized it doesn't need to break in." Suddenly, every screen on the bridge lit up with garbled static. A harsh, jarring screech filled the air, making everyone wince. The lights flickered in rapid, frantic bursts like the ship itself was panicking. Harlow covered his ears, gritting his teeth as the sound grew louder, rising to a pitch so sharp it felt like it was drilling into their skulls. "Make it stop!" Harlow shouted, slamming his hands on the console. "Make it stop!" But then the sound stopped on its own. Static remained on every screen. But slowly, the static shifted. Shapes emerged from the chaos of flickering black and white. A symbol. No, not a symbol. A face. Pale. Hollow. Empty eyes stared at them from every monitor on the bridge. "Commander," Marin whispered. She was frozen in place, eyes wide with terror. Grant felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He knew instinctively that what he was looking at wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't human. "Who are you?" Grant asked aloud, his voice hoarse. The static shifted. The face tilted its head slowly, unnaturally, as if hearing him for the first time. Then it spoke. "We are not trapped anymore." The voice was wrong. Not a single voice but many, layered on top of each other, echoing and distorting. It wasn't coming from the monitors. It was coming from inside the ship systems. "Shut it down," Grant ordered. "Cut all power to comms, sensors, everything." "I'm trying." Marin's hands scrambled over the emergency override, fingers shaking as she entered command after command. "It's not accepting input." "I'm locked out, Commander. It's like it's taken root in the ship's systems." "AI infection," Harlow muttered, pulling his sidearm free from his holster. "It's in the mainframe. We need to cut it out." Manual core reset. "There's no time," Grant said through gritted teeth. His eyes moved back to the viewport. The darkness was no longer outside. It was inside. Slowly, tendrils of shadow leaked out from the walls, the vents, and the cracks in the ceiling. They slithered into the room with an almost deliberate patience. Silent. Unstoppable. Like water creeping under a door. Back to back. Grant barked, stepping away from the center of the bridge. He raised his sidearm, aiming at the closest tendril. "Don't let it touch you." Harlow and Marin moved quickly, their backs to Grant, weapons raised. The bridge felt smaller now. The emergency red lights cast long, dancing shadows across every wall, every surface. But not all the shadows moved with the lights. "Commander, if it's already in the system, it's not just a ghost," Marin said, her voice barely steady. "It's everywhere now. We can't purge it. Not like this." "Then we don't purge it," Grant said, his eyes fierce with resolve. "We eject it." "Eject it?" Harlow gave him a look of disbelief. "What does that even mean?" "Full hull purge," Grant growled. "Atmosphere vent. Blow every deck, every compartment, every hatch, every lock. We open the ship to space." "That'll kill us too, sir," Marin said, her breath rapid. "We won't survive it." "Better than letting that survive," Grant said, nodding toward the growing mass of tendrils. "Besides, we have EVA suits in the emergency lockers. Move. Now." Harlow didn't hesitate. He spun on his heels and sprinted toward the storage lockers. Marin was right behind him. The tendrils moved faster. One of them lashed out at Marin, whipping toward her ankle. She screamed and jumped back, firing off 2 shots from her sidearm. The rounds hit, and the tendril flinched, but only for a moment. "Don't stop!" Grant shouted, firing at another tendril as it reached for Harlow. "Grab the suits and seal up. We're blowing it all." "Got it!" Harlow shouted, dragging the EVA suits free from the locker. He tossed one to Marin and pulled another over his own head, his breath fogging the visor as he sealed it shut. "Let's do it, Commander." Grant didn't put his suit on just yet. He strode to the emergency override console and slammed his fist into the red manual release button. A klaxon blared. "Warning, atmospheric purge initiated. Evacuate immediately." "Seal up," he barked, pulling on his own EVA suit as the countdown began. The tendrils whipped wildly now, surging for them, faster than before. The shadows knew. They knew. 3, 2, 1. Every hatch, every compartment, every vent opened at once. Air roared out of the ship like a hurricane. The tendrils thrashed, yanked backward by the force. The darkness fought it, clawing at the walls, leaving deep gashes in the metal. Grant, Marin, and Hollow gripped handrails as the vacuum pulled everything out into the black void of space. They watched as the shadows were ripped from the ship, scattering into the darkness. But as Grant watched them drift away, one last shape emerged from the swirling storm. A face. Pale. Hollow eyes. Smiling. "We are free." Then, it was gone. Silence returned. For now,